Good morning, everyone. I hope that everyone can see and hear us. So my name is Rachel. I'm one of the Clore Fellows from the Women and Girls Emerging Leaders course. I also work for a not-for-profit called EqualiTeach that does equality training and education. And I'm really pleased to be welcoming and chatting to Dr Wanda Wyporska today, who's the director of the Equality Trust. And I'm sure you've also all read the profile of her as well and all of the brilliant things that she does. So trustee of a few charities as well, and an equalities advisor to a variety of different kind of forums and groups and discussions, and has a book as well that she's written. So if I just hand across to you, Wanda Wyporska, if you're happy to just, for anyone who doesn't know anything else about what the Equality Trust does, if you want to just give us a brief intro, and then we'll get into kind of questions and discussions.
Great. Hi and good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's got a cup of tea or coffee or whatever their brew is this morning to get them through this early session. I'm Dr Wanda Wyporska and I'm Executive Director of the Equality Trust. And the Equality Trust is the national charity that campaigns to reduce economic and social inequalities. And I can truly say that after this summer, I think we've made huge gains in public understanding of the importance of inequality, both social and economic, and the realization that there's such a lot still to do. So it's been a very, very interesting time, as I'm sure it has been for a lot of you out there.
Brilliant, thank you. So there will, of course, be opportunities. We're going to try throughout the whole of this session. So to wait to ask questions until later on. If you do have questions, you can pop them in the Q&A box, and I know that our friends from Clore Social are here and they're going to be monitoring those, and I'll try and keep an eye out for your questions as well. We've had a few come in earlier, so I'll try and include those in our discussion. So just to start off, we were going to talk a little bit about kind of leadership, and I suppose what that means to you. How would you describe your leadership style?
Well, I don't think it fits in any of the boxes that, you know, we're all made to fill out to try and profile us. I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of those things. But I think it's a culmination really of all my life experience. I grew up as a single, in a single parent household with my mum and my gran in a northern town in the 70s and 80s. And I think, you know, for those of us who grew up at that time, it was a really formative time in terms of what was happening politically, what was happening socially. And I think that really impacted on my life. And I was brought up in a household where, you know, I was aware of what was going on. I was aware that, you know, we didn't buy things from South Africa. There were countries that we boycotted. My mum was sort of really an expert on Native Americans. So, you know, I knew what was going on in America and in the States at all sorts of levels. And I just sort of grew up in that type of household, really. And I grew up being very different. So I think, you know, growing up in a northern town in the 70s where there weren't many people that looked like me was quite a formative experience. And then I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to a girls' independent school. And again, you know, talk about being thrust into the heart of inequality. So I think all of those experiences really had an impact on me. And I think it's, for me, leadership in this particular role at the Equality Trust and working on social justice is the pinnacle of really what I would ever have wanted to do when I was younger, which is looking at all of those causes, taking the evidence to sort of satisfy the geeky academic in me, and then trying to get real change. So I think my leadership has been probably more authentic in this role than, you know, if I were running a different charity. And I think it's been amazing to be able to really connect with such a wide range of people, because there is that commonality. There is, you know, I may be more removed now than I am from a lot of beneficiaries now, but I've been through a lot of experiences that people we work with have been through. And I think, you know, there's a natural empathy there. So I think I made a conscious decision really to use my experience and my life as part of my leadership. And what I always say to people is that you don't have to do that. Just because you're a Black woman doesn't mean you have to become the Black woman CEO. But if you choose to do that, then, you know, there is emotional labor there, as we all know. But I think the rewards are quite outstanding, because we can bring a different perspective using our lived experience to situations that many policymakers and many leaders just don't have. So I've really valued that. You know, at times it's hard, but I think for me, it really gives an added dimension.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting talking point of what role, like how authenticity makes a really good leader, and lived experience as well is often a discussion in the public sector about how important that is, to have people with lived experience being part of the organisations that are working to overcome those issues and those barriers and those boundaries. And obviously the topic that's going to be on a lot of people's minds is this year, 2020, everything that has come with it. And would you say that your leadership style has changed this year, or would you say that the way that you were leading the organisation hasn't necessarily changed, but you've been able to therefore, within your own style, adapt to everything that has been thrown at us this year?
Well, I don't think there's a leader out there who hasn't changed during this year. And if they haven't, then, you know, they probably need to look at themselves and ask why. I mean, I think there have been two really critical things for me. One has been being on the Clore Social Leadership Programme. And I think this has been a year like no other. And I'm really grateful to everybody who's put the programme together for their continued flexibility and adaptability, and to all of the people who are really, you know, we're all as a cohort really supporting each other, and that's been amazing, and forging those connections. But I think it's really as well enabled me to look at leadership of the organisation externally and leadership of the organisation internally. And I think, you know, we have really hit a time where all of a sudden, you know, the world has discovered racism and inequality. I mean, who knew these things existed before the summer of 2020? And although there's a lot of frustration with, you know, with a lot of us who've been working on this for decades, the moment is there, and we are seeing bigger change, and we're seeing bigger change from a wider range of people. So, for example, we've had to pivot in terms of what the Equality Trust does, because we've been approached by a lot of organisations to work with them to look really at deep structural change. And I suppose, you know, that has also made us look at what we're doing, and whether we have the capacity to support that, and how we can gain better influence for good with organisations to sort of, you know, support them on that way. So I think we've recognised that now the doors that we've been sort of knocking against for years are swinging open. And it's a bit like, you know, I don't know if you've ever sort of done mock fighting or anything like that, but, you know, the biggest trick, or when you're playing with your kids, the biggest trick is, you know, they're coming right at you and you just move aside. And that's what's happened with the open doors. And we've all sort of stumbled through them, quite surprised that, you know, organisations that we never thought were interested are now clamouring to do something. So I think, you know, leadership has had to change, and it's also had to change in terms of internal work. So, you know, lots of team change, people changing their priorities, sort of more churn, as we've seen in this sector. And at leadership level, I don't think I've ever seen so many job adverts for chief executives at the moment. I think, you know, people having a real moment about, well, what do I really want to do with my life, and is this fulfilling? Or alternatively, you know, people have caring duties, people have a range of different issues that they realise that they just can't give 150% to the day job anymore. So I think there are lots of factors going on that are affecting leadership. But one thing I would say is that we are in a sector that says it wants change. And so we have to embrace this change, painful as it is. And it's, you know, it's been very painful for some people. I'm not in any way diminishing that. But we say we want change. So when change starts to happen, we can't be sitting there on the sidelines, you know, fretting and deciding that it's all too difficult, because it's only through crucial change like we've seen this summer, and, you know, there is more coming, that we can actually start to change the world and really, you know, break through with the issues that we want to see progress on. So change isn't a policy paper or an article in a magazine or in a newspaper. You know, change is hard, gritty and painful. And this is, you know, this is a real sort of wake-up call to most of us in this sector, I think.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I kind of echo the sentiment where you're saying, you know, a lot of people feeling frustrated that it's taken people this long to kind of wake up and notice and kind of get there. Also really hopeful to have so much interest and so many people, you know, as at our organisation, we work predominantly in the education sector, and so wonderful to have, we've been inundated with emails and phone calls with schools saying, how can we do better? How can we get this right? You know, what can we do. So I think, you know, as you're saying, change is coming and we've got to embrace that. And I think it was a Clore Social, something that I learned on my Clore Social thing about storming, norming and performing, and that actually the beginning of change, like you said, is not, it's not easy, it's the difficult bit, and we've got to get through that bit to then really thrive. I've seen we've got a couple of questions coming through, and we had one that came in actually beforehand, which I think you've sort of almost answered already, which was kind of how do you think this year will change our approach to work, I suppose. So that's kind of more generally than leadership, but just as a society, how do you think this year and the pandemic might change the way that we approach work?
Well, I think, you know, there are several different phases, aren't there? I mean, there's looking at whether we need to be office-based, how we communicate, and people's different styles of communication. So for some people, they're absolutely loving being at home and just communicating through Zoom and not coming into offices and not commuting. Other people really miss that spark. I mean, you know, the amount of times we've started a campaign or started an action just from a sort of off-the-cuff comment over coffee, or, you know, listening into someone's conversation, and I really miss that, I have to admit. So, you know, I think the swings and roundabouts. I think, you know, at the beginning when it was sunny and we could sit outside, or, you know, if we're lucky enough to have a garden, that sort of thing, I think it all felt a lot easier. And there were days, you know, I think everyone had days where you'd get up in the morning and you'd probably do about 20 or 30% because you just couldn't do any more. I think that has really taken a toll over the summer, where many people haven't had, you know, the sort of getaway, relaxing break that forces you not to think about things. And we're now going into a sort of winter of discontent as well. So I think we're going to see a lot more we're going to have a lot more focus on well-being. We're going to have a lot more focus on people's roles in teams, communication, and what work actually means. You know, what do we need to do? What needs to be done? What's just being for the sake of it? And how can we best use our time? So, you know, I'm glad to see that the sort of cult of presenteeism is hopefully dead by now. But it's about what can we do together and how can we work differently together? And that will spark new ways of working as well. Personally, I'm quite wedded to an office because, you know, I do like to have that space and I like to have that separation between work and home. But, you know, there are some days when I really don't want to leave the house, and it's much more convenient to work from home. So I think there are going to be big shifts. And I think there's going to be a shift in the centralisation of most charities in London. I think, you know, charities are looking at how they can, all sorts of sectors are looking at how they can employ people beyond London. And that should spread some opportunities and contribute to, you know, reducing regional inequalities. So there's a lot of different ways that we can use good quality and well-paid work to, you know, for the better, so that we're all able to have a much better differentiation between work and life, because let's face it, it's just not happening at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Just noticing questions and trying to field them all coming in. So before we move on from kind of discussing kind of the more leadership side of things, we've got an interesting question has come through in the Q&A that's asking what has been your hardest leadership moment, which is quite a difficult question, if you're happy to answer it.
That is a difficult one. I think for me it was a decision of how much of myself to put into the work, and I think it really was making that decision to use my own experience and my past to really sort of, I suppose, get through to people at a different level, and to be able to also guard my own private life, so, you know, my personal life as well. So I think that's a decision that I make in every interview. That's a decision that I make in every sort of broadcast piece, or, you know, how far do you go? But also in talks like this, and I think, you know, that was a hard decision, because, you know, there are parts of my life I've spoken about which, you know, may not be the way that other people have experienced parts of my life. Let's just put it that way. And I think, you know, it is about how much of that emotional toll you're willing to take. So I think really that's probably the hardest decision that I've made. I mean, there have obviously been a lot of management issues that I've, you know, had to deal with, but I wouldn't want to shame myself or other people by going into the details of those right now. I'm sure everyone understands that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a really valuable question, not question, but kind of almost a nugget of advice, perhaps for people entering into a leadership role or a leadership journey, or perhaps a role that's going to have more public opportunities, etc. That actually that is a important thing to think about. How much of yourself do you want to put into it? How much, where are you going to draw your own boundaries, and how important those boundaries are. So this we've got an interesting question also come through from Shax, who is the CEO of Clore, saying, leadership is a lifelong journey, and how will you keep learning and developing once Clore becomes a distant memory?
Well, thank you, Shax. And I have to say, I can't imagine Clore becoming a distant memory, because we are going on beyond our time, which is very good and very generous, just because of everything that's happened, but also because of the friendships that I've made through this cohort, as I'm sure anyone who's done it have done. I am all about learning. I did a doctorate. I'm doing Clore. If I'm not doing a course, I'm learning pottery this year. If I'm not learning something, then I'm basically 6 foot under. So learning is my key sort of value. And so I read a lot. I read a lot about different experiences. I was really struck, and this was a piece of material that came through Clore by cynics work. I can find endless books to read. That's my particular preferred style of reading. I've been converted to YouTube a little bit, but only because I was finding a particular embroidery stitch quite difficult. But my natural thing is to read, and also to learn from my peers. I'm part of, I think, 3 action learning sets now, and I think it's a real comfort to know that other people are going through the sorts of things you're going through, because very often we sit there with a problem and we think, oh, this is terrible. How do I deal with this particular issue? And then, I speak to colleagues and they're saying, well, that's fine. That happened to me in year 2 or year 3. And actually, what I didn't do made sure that it got bigger and it became a bigger problem. So, stamp on it now, or, all sorts of advice, because there are a finite number of problems that we face in some ways, and you can bet your bottom dollar that most of us have been through it. And now I'm really learning the other way, because I'm able to support people who are just moving into management and leadership now, and to be able to sort of pay that forward and pass that on. And that also teaches me and make sure that I go back to the beginning. I have to say, I came into the Equality Trust having never been a CEO or director of an organisation, and I learned on the job. I had to. It was like an apprenticeship, and so it was great to actually. I think it was good to have Clore at this stage after 3 or 4 years, because I could set my lived experience of leadership in a sense, and all of the mistakes I'd made, and and sit there and think, oh, if only I'd known that. But I also had a base from which to work, so it wasn't all theoretical, so I can apply the knowledge and the theory to actual mistakes that I've made, but also some good things as well. So yeah, I think it's just a continuous journey for me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'd echo what you said about Clore, particularly in terms of the networks that you get. Obviously, I know we're both doing our job here as being good adverts for the program, but it has really, the networks that you make. I'm still very much in touch with all of the brilliant course with, and we're constantly keeping each other, and that's part of it as well. We're keeping each other informed of different things that are happening, different events, different things we can read, and different ways that we can support the different organizations that we work for and things like that. So it has been a good catalyst, I think, Clore, for just learning and development. Let me see what other questions we've got coming through, because we've got a lot. So I suppose it seems people are kind of keen to talk equality, and I know we've got a lot of people from the attendees list who are from a lot of different organisations that work in a variety of different areas of equality, I suppose. And this is again another huge question, but what would you say are, I would say, the biggest I won't say the biggest challenge, the biggest challenges facing us with regards to equality in the UK at the moment?
Well, I think I think one of the biggest problems is the fact that we work so much in silos, and equality organisations aren't necessarily working together. You know, we talk about intersectionality, we preach intersectionality, but by God, we really very rarely actually practice it in our work. And that's changing a little bit. But, you know, what I love about the Equality Trust is that we are at this nexus of equality and diversity organisations, economic justice organisations, and third sector and voluntary organisations, particularly those working on poverty. And so what we're able to do is really pass around those insights and work together so that all of those areas are working together in as much as they can, and informed by each other's practice. I mean, one of the things I'm really delighted about, which is a campaign that we started 2 or 3 years ago with Just Fair, is that this week we've seen a lot of discussion about the socioeconomic duty. So Section 1 of the Equality Act that wasn't brought into effect, but we're seeing a lot of different support from the Inequalities in Health Alliance, which we are founder members of. They did polling saying that 78% support of people supported a duty, and this duty says that public bodies have to take into account the effects of their policies on inequality and on those who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. Now, this is something every equality organisation, every poverty organisation can get behind. So, you know, there are examples of where we can come together, but I'm afraid, you know, there isn't enough of that in the sector. So I think that's the first challenge, that, you know, we are not coming together. And so there's a huge lack of efficiency and lack of effectiveness. And there's an ability for organisations and issues to be picked off one by one, because we're not actually working together. So I think that's a big issue. I think the other big issue in the sector in terms of equality is the failure to recognise class, and a failure really to have a more diverse range of people working in the sector. And, you know, I'm sorry if it looks like I'm biting the hand that feeds in a sense, but we are absolutely disproportionately run by, advised by, policymakers are, workers are, you know, employees are in this sector predominantly middle class. And, you know, this is just not good enough, to be honest, because although, you know, as you talked about at the beginning, how do we use that lived experience? We're still, you know, looking to sort of middle class professional white policymakers to interpret the data, you know, without asking, do we have the right data? Are we asking the right questions? And so we're very often not asking the right questions because we're looking at it through an assumed lens of this middle class experience. So, you know, we have a lot to do to reform our sector as well, and to give away some of that power, at least, because we are going in the wrong direction if we don't do this, and we will continue to do that, and ultimately we're failing our beneficiaries.
Absolutely, yeah, couldn't really agree. I think that's a powerful point about kind of the need for more collaboration kind of versus competition. I know that obviously in the charity sector often competition ends up trumping when we're thinking about funding and things like that, but actually there can be so much more power and movement actually from collaborating and working together. I think, as like you said, an important point to consider kind of social inequality in terms of class, and how socioeconomic inequality, yes, it's not protected in law as it should be, in the same way as other protected characteristics. And I know that there's one of the issues around that is there's a huge, isn't there, to people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And I wonder, I suppose this is more of a wondering or about how much, where this year, you know, this crisis has led to perhaps so many more people accepting support from the government because, you know, of the crisis that we find ourselves in. I wonder whether that will help at all in removing some of the stigma around socioeconomic, or whether that divide will still be there once this kind of crisis passes. What do you think?
Well, I think, you know, we've already seen that universal credit has had to be increased by £20 because all of a sudden a whole range of people have found themselves on universal credit, and it's not enough, despite the fact that obviously millions of people have been living off this for years and years. You know, there is movement there, and I think we're going to find more people, unfortunately, in that situation. So, you know, all we can see with a glooming recession and, you know, potentially with Brexit as well, is inequality widening. And the problem with inequality widening is that in countries with high levels of inequality, as we know from the evidence, we also see higher levels of those socially determined ills. So higher levels of poor mental and physical health, higher levels of teenage pregnancy and obesity, higher levels of drug and alcohol addiction, higher levels of imprisonment, lower levels of educational attainment, and lower levels of trust. Now, all of those are issues which many of the people listening now are dealing with in their own organisations. So, you know, we can see that there's going to be a huge need. I think in terms of socioeconomic disadvantage, you know, none of us like the terms that are used to describe any of these situations. And that's why, you know, we're not campaigning for this to be a protected characteristic, because, you know, there are a few protected characteristics that are changeable, that will change in your lifetime, but obviously people move in and out of poverty, people move in and out of disadvantage. And so, you know, we are far more supportive of the socioeconomic duty than in adding socioeconomic deprivation or poverty to as a protected characteristic, you know, because these are different things. But you know, I think, how have we got in a country that is a fifth or sixth most richest economy, how have we got to the stage where we spent a week or more talking about whether we should feed children? You know, this is just unbelievable in our society. And the fact that, you know, the fact that people are going to food banks and were going to food banks before is an indictment of the poverty wages that are being paid. So it's looking back at the economic system. And this is one of the things, you know, we can go beyond the stigma of people having to pick up food or people having to sort of out themselves as you know, being in a difficult situation. But the truth is that we've allowed an economy to grow with the gig economy, with platforms that basically do not pay people a wage that is enough to live off. And so the charity sector is picking up all of the pieces of that, and the corporate sector is continuing to make profit, to pay dividends, and, you know, continuing along its merry way. So we know that, you know, the richer people are getting richer, and we know that poorer people are getting poorer. This is not rocket science in any way. And so, you know, if we don't tackle inequality, and if we don't as a sector tackle those structural inequalities, then we're going to carry on seeing this increase, and we're going to carry on putting bandages on, giving people food parcels, unless we actually question those structural issues. And that's why, you know, the Equality Trust have just had funding very generously from John Ellerman Foundation to set up a coalition of third sector organisations to really look at those structural inequalities, and to get organisations to think, yes, we are dealing with beneficiaries, yes, we are, you know, supporting them in the way that they need in an immediate way, but actually how far back up do we want to go to tackle the causes, the root causes of the issues that we're actually tackling on the coalface, so to speak. So, you know, we want to see the sector going a little bit further back, stepping a little bit further back, and using its power, its social power, as Sheila McKechnie Foundation have said, to really get change upstream, so that, you know, we don't have to deal with so much downstream, because this is people's lives we're talking about. It's not, you know, this isn't a sort of intellectual game. This is people on the ground, and these are people who are scarred for life. You know, children going to food banks, knowing that they're not getting enough food, or they haven't got a winter coat, or, you know, aren't going to have another pair of shoes. All these things scar you for life. And, you know, some of us remember various issues from our childhood, you know, 40, 50 years later. So, you know, it's really important that we get this right. And this is a big opportunity now to try and get some change.
Thank you. And perhaps the right time then for this question that came in, which is, how do you keep from about inequality, given
do I
keep from becoming cynical about inequality?
You mean I'm not cynical? The thing that keeps me from being cynical, and I am quite cynical. I mean, I spent some time as a journalist, so that's a prerequisite, really, is the fact that this is such a huge battle and it needs to be won. And if it is won, then it will have huge repercussions for everybody else. You know, as I said, those social determinants, if we reduce inequality, then we've got a very good crack at reducing all of those as well. And that's really what keeps me going, in a sense, because I feel very privileged to have a platform where I can talk about this, where I can be an advocate, where I can, you know, go into the media and talk about these issues, but also where we can raise other people's voices. So our Young People's Project at the Equality Trust was instrumental in you know, raising their voices to the level of the UN. So they met the UN Special Rapporteur on Poverty a couple of years ago. And, you know, that is part of what we all really need to be doing, making sure that when we've got that platform, we pass it on to other people as well. So, you know, that's what keeps me going in a sense. And also the next generation, I mean, it makes me feel really old saying that, but, you know, they're not taking any hostages. You know, once you explain to people the structural level of inequality, of racism, of sexism, of economic deprivation, then they understand, but also they don't feel guilty, because we've been, you know, since the 80s, we've been in this time where people have been told it's up to you as an individual. You can pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You can, you know, get a nice house, work hard, get everything for your family. And we know that's just not true. We know, you know, that isn't true for huge groups of people. So when they understand that the odds are stacked against them and it's not their fault as an individual, you know, then they're ready to sort of start to campaign, start to, you know, really get active and to get some change, because inequality isn't inevitable. You know, it's a result of policy changes. So we can change this. And that's really, I suppose, what gives me hope.
Thank you. Give us all a little there on a Tuesday morning. Brilliant. So seeing more kind of questions come through, I know they're coming in from different places. So just to mention to Nadia, if I am missing anyone, then please do let me know. There's a question coming in asking you what the cooperative model as a way forward to address some of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's we are looking at fundamental change to the economy, and the cooperative model is one of the best ways of doing this. I mean, we've seen in places like Mondragon in the Basque Country where, you know, these are whole communities where people can move in and out of different jobs. They have access to learning. I think the CEO pay ratio there is something like 2 to 1. You know, I think they got very upset when it was moving towards 3, but just those flatter structures. And, you know, at the very basic level, we are exchanging our labor for money. You know, to bring it right back down to basics, and the amount of profit that's being made off our labor is going to dividends, is going to those who are rich already. And so we need a greater share of that profit going back to labor, going back to workers. And that share has increased. The share that's going to profit, to dividends, has gone up and up and up. And so what's happened is we have the biggest wage stagnation since Napoleonic era. So, you know, we have gig economy, which is exploitative and, you know, literally pays for the work that you do. It's a bit like, you know, pin money and Victorian peace wages. You know, you get paid for the meal that you deliver. You have no sickness, no holiday, none of that. And so it's really bad to see that we're going back in time. So we fully support the cooperative model and would like to see far more of that.
Brilliant. I've seen an earlier question that came in, which was asking about how can we encourage leadership in perhaps lower socioeconomic backgrounds, particularly now with technological opportunities and inequalities there as well.
Well, I think there are several aspects to this. I think, you know, what do we consider to be leadership is the first thing. And there are lots of people in communities who are leaders and don't need certificates to prove it, and are merrily going about their business and being a leader in a community. I mean, I remember, I don't know if people here have seen or remember Boys from the Black Stuff. Again, I keep going back to the 80s. But, you know, the trade union rep there would sit in his living room, and there would be people queuing around the block to talk to him, because he had access to knowledge about employment rights, to knowledge about a whole range of things. He was politically educated, and, you know, he was the leader in that community. So I think, you know, we need to step back a bit and not impose I'm not suggesting that the person who put this question is doing that, but we need to step back and think about, what does leadership look like in all its different forms, and is it reliant on any sort of, you know, who is bestowing that name of leader, you know, who is judging, you know, you are a leader, you're not. So I think that's a much bigger question than I can actually answer.
You know, I think that's a again, another important one, and again, something that came through from the Clore process about really, yeah, digging into by a leader and what does leadership really mean, what does leadership really look like. And I think so often people have a set idea about what it means to be a leader, and quite often that has a particular from what we have seen, I suppose, in kind of popular culture, and where we've seen essentially white men in suits, you know, with angry faces as leaders, and actually thinking about, you know, what other ways there are that we can lead. And as you said, you know, grassroots organizations that have been leading the way for a long time.
Sorry, I'd just say, I think another thing on that is that, you know, what I've been struck by any sort of leadership or management course that I've been on, is how all of the models that have been used have been made by men, apart from the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. And, you know, one time when I was doing a course at the TUC, we did actually complain to the course leaders, because we said all of these models are made by men. You know, all of these issues, if you look at the majority of the books on management or leadership, are written by men and are about ticking boxes, following certain profiles, and almost a sort of flow chart of, if you answer this, therefore you are that, and now we can deal with you. And that to me is an absolute indictment of what we consider leadership to be. Sorry, I really have a thing about that, as you can tell.
Yeah, no, absolutely, me too. When I was on the program, I worked with a group of women to explore feminist leadership and explore kind of what that looks like, and you know, we ended up in a whole thing where actually we need to redefine. We were like, do we need to redefine feminism? Do we need to redefine leadership? Do we need to redefine both and look at how? But certainly thinking about, you know, when people name the qualities of how they would describe kind of what they have seen as successful leaders, but then also about actually how would you like to be led? And often those qualities don't necessarily match up, because we've got this kind of set idea of you need to tick these boxes and this way, but actually we much prefer people to be much more human and complex in the way that we kind of interact and are led by them or work with them. I'm just going to make sure I'm getting some more of these questions in. I can see that they're coming through in the chat, so I want to make through. I've got a question here that says, totally agree with how problematic terms like disadvantaged are. I'm especially interested in how communities we work with feel about those terms, and how we can encourage the sector away from using these so liberally. And ties in with another question, which is asking really how can we make sure that charities don't become part of the problems that we're talking about?
Well, I'll take the last one first. I think charities are already part of the problem that we're talking about, to be quite honest. And I think those charities that recognise that are the ones that will really, you know, get ahead and be more appealing in a sense, because again, coming back to that younger generation, you know, they are not giving to huge sort of oil tanker type corporate charities. You know, they're not going to set up a £50 a month donation direct debit. You know, they want to be connected to the causes, and they want to see authentic leadership, and they will question leadership that doesn't look like it reflects the cause. So I think, you know, charities are going to have to shift as well. And I think but I think, you know, the one thing we haven't mentioned in a sense is the role of the board. And we know that boards are, you know, by nature very conservative, and that's understandable, but also what they see as leadership and what they see as a leader. And do they see the white man in the suit as the capable all-round leader who will be able to go in and talk to corporates and talk to funders and, you know, go on the media, all of these things. And so, you know, there's a wider question there about trustees and how they feel about leadership, because that is the sort of key leverage point in a sense in the charity sector, because of the way that governance is. I mean, I think, you know, the linguistics of naming are very, very problematic at all levels. You know, we do training on equality and inequality. And one of the things that I normally do is sort of sit down with participants and go through the protected characteristics and say, you know, what terms do you know to describe these? What would you say are acceptable, not acceptable, or it depends? And that's really interesting, because until you break down people's fears about descriptors and knowing how they can refer to people, or feeling uncertain about what terms they can use, then you can't have a really good conversation or a meaningful conversation about these issues. So breaking down a language is the first way. And I think, you know, we need to think as a sector how we are talking about people. And again, it comes back to this point of, you know, if I were in a room with, you know, a mixed group of people with different protected characteristics, I wouldn't be saying, you know, they over there. I wouldn't be describing, you know, well, these people like this, that, and the other. I would say, what do we feel about it? You know, how do we feel? And it's being inclusive in that way. And if we don't have those people with lived experience in the room, then we end up saying they. If you think about how many times you describe beneficiaries as they rather than we, then I think that gives you an idea. But I do not have, you know, any great ideas, I'm afraid, about how we can refer to people other than how they might want to be referred to. You know, in the US, there is a movement, I can't remember the exact name, but it does mention poverty. It's a poor people's movement. And they are quite happy to identify as being poor and to form a movement in that collective way. And I wonder, you know, if we would ever get to that stage here. I mean, hopefully we wouldn't have to do that, but, you know, I'm not confident about that.
Had some questions coming through. One being that that the person works for an organisation that kind of sees equality and diversity as a given, and I think that is often a barrier that we come up against. That people kind of think, you know, often people might not realise the amount of work that it takes to have an equal and inclusive workplace. So, what advice would you have for? I suppose it's a kind of two-pronged. So what advice would you have for organisations looking to really embed equality in their approach? But also, what advice would you have for someone who's perhaps trying to be the person making that point and arguing for it in an organisation that isn't quite open to it yet?
Well, I think there's, you know, coming back to linguistics, there's a sort of trick we can use in a sense, which is for all those organisations that think they've got EDI or whatever you want to call it. I'm actually calling it DI now because I think it really should. You know, it's like when I used to go to schools and you walk into a school and they say, oh, we don't have a bullying problem here. And you think, you must have no pupils then. You know, and the cynic in me, which I referred to earlier, would say, well, you know, how is this possible? And actually another person I was speaking to from another learning set said that, you know, he works on equalities issues, and he said, you know, what he says to head says, well, that's amazing because you've achieved something quite unique. Could you tell us how you did that? So, you know, I wouldn't advocate going in and being sarcastic straight away, but I do think that at this time when we are talking about structural inequalities, that we are able to say to people, that's great that you feel that this is a diverse and inclusive workplace to work in. Do you have evidence for that from your staff survey? But actually, I think now we really need to look at structural inequalities within the organisation and make sure that we're on top of that, so we can take it to the next level. It's like, you know, if you are advertising equalities training, nobody wants to call it EDI training or equalities training because immediately everyone just goes, ugh. But if you put a little word like enhancing on top of it, it already makes people think they're doing something and that they will enhance it and they will make it better. So, you know, when we work with organisations, we've got all sorts of ways of taking the conversation up a level to make organisations feel that they are doing something really special. And I want to come back to the women of colour and BAME and BAMER and, you know, all of these acronyms, because I can see this in the chat. I personally do not like the phrase people of colour. Because, you know, everybody has a colour, and if you're going to get, you know, artistic and technical about this, somebody may well correct me, but it's my understanding that black and white are not actually colours. So there you go, you know, you can demolish that one. And I think, you know, it's really, really beyond time that we got rid of BAME, because one of the important things is, and I was looking at the ONS statistics on the ethnic minority pay gap, is that this masks huge disparities. It masks huge disparities in terms of education. And one of my bugbears when I was working for an education union was the fact that the statistics do not harmonise over various different organisations. So whether it's the ONS, whether it's other organisations. So often you're comparing white British, or you mean British, or sorry, you mean white British, or you mean white, or you mean white working class, and these terms are not used in the strictest way that they ought to be. So sometimes you're comparing data that aren't actually comparable. And when we put BAME into one huge pot, basically we're just being lazy and saying people who aren't white. But we're actually not even saying that, because if you're saying ethnic minority, you know, I'm part Polish. So Poles, Lithuanians, white minorities are also included in this. So it's an absolute nonsense if you can't actually define your terms. And it's absolutely lazy, and it leads to bad policy making. So yes, we need to be, as individuals, you know, the individuals we are. Now, I'm not suggesting that obviously there's a special category for Bajan, Polish, English, with possibly some other nationalities thrown in that I don't know about with my mixed forebears. But I do think that we need greater scrutiny and greater, a much better categorisation than we currently have now. And I'm on the inclusive data task force that the ONS is running at the moment, specifically to argue for those sorts of issues.
That was going to be my question. I know that you've already kind of mentioned, and obviously being on the data task force, and you've mentioned your kind of your academic side of your brain as well. And I was going to ask, in your opinion, kind of how important is data as a tool in getting better equality in organisations, whether they're charities or schools or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think data is really important if it's collected in the right way. And, you know, we all know the issues with monitoring when people aren't explaining the value of monitoring and why it's being done. So I think data can be incredibly helpful. It shows us what's happening and what's not happening, but it's a benchmark, and it's only one tool that we have. You know, we need to look at the quantitative and the qualitative data. We need to know what people's experiences are, and also, you know, what the statistics are. So, you know, as the Equality Trust, we have over 20 local groups around the country. We have an everyday inequality platform where we encourage people to tell their stories of inequality, and we want to bring together lived and learned experience, because we believe that all of them have their place. So, you know, it's not an either or. And I think, you know, to be honest, a lot of the discussion about inequality has always been the finer points of whether the Gini coefficient is going up or down, or are you using the Palmer ratio, and blah, blah, blah. And we can get caught up in measurement. You know, I had a conversation on BBC Oxford yesterday where, you know, they tried to go down the route of measurement of poverty. And it's just, you know, really, are we going to get bogged down in absolute relative minimum income standards, the social metric, you know, social metrics commission? Can we just stick to the point that, you know, there are children starving? And I think that's probably a bit more important than the data, you know, the measurements that we use. There is that, you know, there is always that issue of having to go down the defense of measurement, but, you know, we should have robust evidence in as much as we can.
Okay, brilliant. I'm conscious we're sort of about 10 minutes left, and I know there's a fairly big question that came in beforehand, which, what advice would you give to the government at the moment with regards to tackling inequality?
Oh dear, where to start? I'm sure anyone in this chat would have tens, if not hundreds, of things to say to the government right now. I will stick to a couple. I think we need to enact the socioeconomic duty. It's already in the Equality Act. And there are people who say that if it had been enacted in 2010, then this would have had a completely different effect on austerity, that you know, this wouldn't have been able to happen, the cuts wouldn't have been able to happen. I think this would transform people's lives. It's been enacted in Scotland, it's going to be enacted in Wales, and so, you know, this is one small but very mighty and effective tool we have to really transform that millions of people's lives. I think, you know, we have seen encouraging words from Theresa May and Boris Johnson, whether they're calling it tackling social injustices or levelling up, to say that they recognise the fact that there is inequality. The government has signed up to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and number 10 is inequality. So they have signed up to reduce inequality, to tackle inequality. So we would like to see the government have an inequality reduction strategy, a cross-departmental strategy that recognises the damage that inequality does and really tries to tackle it. And I think if those things if those things happened, then it would go a long way to healing what is becoming a very divided and broken society at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what is perhaps part of the discussion at the moment is the way that issues of equality are presented as debates or kind of two sides, or almost kind of party political, and so, you know, if you need to work towards equality in such and such a way, then perhaps you're anti-capitalist or anti-government, or whatever it is. And how do we kind of overcome that barrier where we get people to recognize that actually, you know, equality is not, it's not partisan, it's inherently political, but not in a kind of I'm not explaining myself very well here, but, you know, we don't want it to be seen as kind of a debate, two sides. You know, we should all be on the side of reducing inequality, and that should be a party political issue.
Well, I mean, I think that would be lovely in an ideal world, wouldn't it? But I think the fact remains that, you know, capitalism was built off the labour of slaves and women, and unpaid labour of women still now. And it's built off the back of, you know, migrants, of people who are here, who are, you know, caught up in all sorts of issues and trafficking. And, you know, basically we can't hide away from those facts that that's what the capitalist system is built on. So, you know, when we're talking about, and this is a difference between talking about equality and talking about inequality, because they're not just a flip. When we're talking about equality, it's looking at, you know, obviously equality across the board in as much as we can. When we're talking about inequality, we're also talking about the top and the bottom. So it's like the difference between talking about poverty. There are many, many people in politics who are quite happy to talk about poverty and are quite happy to support anti-poverty measures because it's a problem over there and it doesn't affect them. When we talk about inequality, we're talking about fundamental shifts in power. And so the people at the top have vested interests in staying at the top. And that's why there's huge resistance to it. You know, if logically I said to, you know, any government minister or any shadow person or anybody really, you know, there's a way that we can reduce obesity, we can reduce health inequalities, we can reduce poor mental health and poor physical health, all of those things. And they said, great, you know, how would we do that? We can reduce income inequality. So we can make sure that, for example, the average FTSE CEO earned 212 times the amount of a minimum wage worker. You know, this is the income disparity. And today, when we're hearing about, you know, Baroness Lawrence's report, and people are talking, and the Northern Conservative MPs are talking about discrimination and disparity and all of these words, and what they're not saying is inequality. Because to say inequality means that you have to look at the top and the bottom. And that's the intellectual and ideological problem. And that is, you know, in my understanding, one of the key reasons why we have not had the traction on inequality. Now, among the public, the British Social Attitudes Survey has shown an increasing support for reducing inequality. Inequality has become one of the key issues. But unless we have that political will, and again, you know, it's like the issues with charities, giving away power, devolving power means, you know, a fundamental change for some people, and they don't want to do it for understandable reasons.
Absolutely, thank you. Again, conscious of timing, I wonder if, as a kind of, for people attending, I know you've mentioned some really important things in terms of the socioeconomic duty and the work that the Equality Trust is doing towards that. Are there any kind of things that you could recommend that people attending, if they wanted to support or the different work that you're talking about, or you mentioned Baroness Lawrence's report, would there be kind of 3 things that you could say that people could go away from this webinar and support the work that you think needs to be done?
Yes, I mean, I think it's, you know, that old-fashioned thing called word of mouth. You know, talk to people, tell them, you know, educate them in a sense. I don't know if that sounds a bit sort of, you know, go forth and and educate people. But we have schools resources as well. So we, you know, if people are working in schools, then that's one aspect we can support with. There's lots of information on our website, obviously, about the campaigns we're running, whether it's on gender and equal pay, whether it's our work with young people. But I think the key thing is within your organisations to look at how you can contribute to tackling the structural inequalities. And I think it comes back to that question of, yes, we may be supporting beneficiaries, but how can we use our organisations to influence the policies that are putting those beneficiaries in those situations in the first place? So I would advocate that. The other thing, as I mentioned, we are setting up a coalition of organisations that are interested in tackling those structural inequalities. So obviously, if anybody wants to support that, that would be marvellous. I think we're starting in January, but we're starting to get support for that already. And I think it's really questioning your organisation in terms of, you know, are we looking at our issues through the lens of inequality or equality? Where are we comfortable acting, and how can we leverage our power as an organisation, and how can we ensure that more of our beneficiaries and more of our groups are able to actually get their voices heard, and to be self-reflective, because we don't have all of the answers, and to make sure that there is a space and an arena for other people to have their voices heard. It's passing it on, really, isn't it? And the other thing I would say is supporting each other at this time, because it's really, really important. All of the work that we're doing is draining, it's intensified this year, and just, I think, supporting each other where we can.
Yeah, thank you. So just to mention that we have put a link to the Equality Trust in the chat. So if people are interested in finding out more, then they can find that. And they can also follow on Twitter, Equality Trust on Twitter, and Wanda is on Twitter as well, so you can find her and follow her. If you're, we've got 3 minutes left, so it's hard to find a question and answer it in those 3 minutes. But I think Shaq's asked a question earlier talking about leadership being about courage, or that courage is a core part of leadership. And what would you do if you were 10 times braver? What's something that you would do if you...
I think I'd probably explode. I don't think there's a lack of courage. I think for me there are issues around what charities can do and what they can't do. And I think, you know, those are the constraints for me rather than my own courage. That's not to say, you know, I'm the most courageous person on the planet. I think it's resource, it's having more resource to do more. I don't think there's any, you know, I don't think there's any end to the vision I have of how we could affect what we're doing and how we could have a bigger impact. I think, unfortunately, I'm sort of racing ahead, as I think a lot of us are, and then dragging the resources and piling them in from wherever we can in order to make that happen. So yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for coming through. Just to say thank you very much for your time, and I just want to echo that. So thank you for your time. Thank you to Clore for hosting it, but also, yeah, thank you to Dr Wanda Wyporska. Really interesting insights, and yeah, I think giving a lot of hope in what can feel like a really bogged down kind of time with regards to equality. So giving us things to focus on, things to work towards, things to think about. And yeah, I think that there are links going into the chat from Clore. You can find us on Twitter, but also just a quick thing that Clore Social is a leadership organisation, so they run lots of different courses, for lots of different sectors as well. So yeah, both Wanda and I have been involved in it on different courses, where I would totally recommend it. It was a brilliant insight into reflecting on yourself, but also introducing a whole network of brilliant people that I'm today, so recommend looking them up as well. But that's all, and there will be more of the Leaders Now events coming up. You look on Clore Social's Twitter, you can sign up to their mailing list, and they'll be able to send you information about that. But I think that's all from me. So thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.